We're looking at our Nazarene beliefs today, our articles of faith, and today we're talking about grace. Some years ago, at a Waffle House in Jackson, Mississippi, the following events took place. I ordered an omelet, and then I ordered some hash browns, scattered, smothered, covered, chunked, diced, and peppered. Some of you will know what that means, and the rest of you need a fresh work of grace in your life if you don't. But anyways, my order came out, and there was my omelet just as I had ordered it, and there were my hash browns just as I had ordered them. But then there was this little bowl full of something. And I asked the waitress, "What is this?" She said, "Grits." I said, "Oh, I didn't order any grits." She said, "You don't have to order them." I said, "You mean you just get them?" She said, "Yeah, you just get them." I said, "Well, do I have to pay for them?" She said, "No, they're free." I said, "Let me get this straight. You don't have to ask for them. You don't even have to pay for them. They're just given to you free of charge." She said, "Yeah, that's right." I said, "Well, that sounds like grace. Grace is like Southern grits. You don't even ask for it. You don't deserve it. You don't pay for it. You just receive it." Part of our statement of faith on grace goes like this. We believe that the grace of God through Jesus Christ is freely bestowed upon all people, enabling all who will to turn from sin to righteousness, believe on Jesus Christ for pardon and cleansing from sin, and follow good works pleasing and acceptable in His sight. Grace is God's saving action towards us. It's not a substance like grits. It is God's work for us and in us. Grace is both pardon and power. It's justifying pardon, and it's regenerating power. Grace pardons us. It is like God is the judge slamming down the gavel and declaring us as innocent, even though we are guilty. And grace also empowers us. It recreates us in the image of God. All of our old ways of living get made new. So grace is the way we talk about salvation, and we as Wesleyan Nazarenes have a distinctive way we understand and talk about grace. So let's get in another brief church history lesson here. Back in the year 1617, 100 years after Martin Luther had nailed his 95 Theses to the church door there in Wittenberg, Germany, there was another church meeting that took place. This church meeting is called the Synod of Dort. And this meeting was held by that Reformed branch of the Reformation. You remember there was 5 Reformations that took place, and this meeting was held by that Reformed branch of the Reformation. And they had taken the teachings of John Calvin and pushed them farther than he ever did. And at this meeting, they condemned a man by the name of Jacobus Arminius. And Arminius had challenged this Calvinistic doctrine of a predetermined election. And what that is that's the teaching that before the foundation of the world, God had already decided who was saved and who wasn't. It's sometimes called, predestination. And you've also heard the term of maybe a 5-point Calvinist, some people will say. And those 5 points are summed up with the acronym TULIP. These 5 points represent the strongest expressions of Calvinistic doctrine. The TULIP stands for this. The T stands for total depravity. That's the idea that humankind is totally lacking of any kind of grace. The U stands for unconditional election. This is the idea of predestination. God decided before the foundation of the world who was saved and who wasn't. It's not conditional upon any decision or anything that anybody would do. It's God's predestining work. The L stands for limited atonement. And this, again, is the idea that Christ died for those who were elected. And then the I stands for irresistible grace. The elect are saved whether they want to be or not. And the P stands for perseverance of the saints. That's sometimes referred to as once saved, always saved. So Jacobus Arminius, he challenged this view of grace. He challenged this view of election. And instead of total depravity, he talked about a prevenient grace, a grace that comes before we ever make any decision for Christ, before we ever come to faith of any kind. God's grace is already at work in our life. Instead of unconditional election, he talked about conditional election upon faith. And instead of a limited atonement, he talked about a universal atonement, that Christ died for all, not just the elect. And instead of the perseverance of the saints, Jacobus Arminius talked about the possibility of the apostasy of the saints, the idea that you can choose to refuse God's grace, his salvation. Now, sometimes those last two, the perseverance of the saints and the possibility of the apostasy of the saints, we talk about them using these two phrases, once saved, always saved, or you can lose your salvation. Well, that's not exactly right. We don't believe that you can lose your salvation like you can lose your car keys. Nobody's going to get to heaven and be like, I've misplaced my salvation. But we do believe that you can say, I want nothing to do with it. You can choose to throw those keys into the ocean and not accept the free gift that was given to you. You can hear Arminius' teaching in the part of our statement on grace that says, we believe that all persons, though in the possession of the experience of salvation, may fall from grace and apostatize. So when John Wesley was putting together his statements of belief for his Methodists, he looked to Arminius' understanding of grace. He went through those 39 articles of the Anglican Church and took out all those Calvinistic parts that didn't fit with his theology. In fact, the Church of England was using that Calvinistic doctrine of harsh predeterminism to say things like, well, if you're poor, God ordained you to be poor. And if you're suffering in squalor, well, God predestined you for such a life, so you should just accept it. They even sang hymns in church. There was an old Anglican hymn that said this, the rich man in his palace, the poor man at his gate. God ordained it all, and them their estate. Well, that's good news if you're rich, but it's pretty oppressive news if you're poor. John Wesley came preaching a good news for the whole person that said, grace is not only pardon, but it is a power to transform life. Wesley destroyed this harsh, deterministic view of predestination. He preached free grace for all. The Anglican Church was even talking about people as some of them being deemed not fit for mercy from God. Wesley said, no, grace means that even when the world considers you worthless, God sees you as priceless. God did not set predetermined limits on his mercy. There are no limits to the mercy of God. God predestined us all for salvation in that Jesus died for all and God's grace is offered to all. And by grace, we all have the power to choose. This is amazing grace. We didn't ask for it. We can't do anything to earn it. We just get it. This is our Nazarene belief.